very issue. And fighting this pandemic without the CDC right there, central to the decisions, is like fighting with one hand tied behind your back.
David, you and Ashley, of course, are both Pulitzer recipients. You won yours for your writing about the last recession. Can you tonight give us a damage assessment so far to the U.S. economy and your take on whether or not $600 to people at the low end is going to cut it?
It won't. The latest reporting that I'm hearing from the Hill is that the Democrats have succeeded in forcing the Republicans to give the same amount of money to lower income people that they were going to give to middle income people, which I think is progress. But Brian, I remember 12 years ago seeing numbers in things like the monthly job reports that I'd never seen before and never expected to see in terms of the scale of the loss. And we're early, so there's a lot of uncertainty. But I'm now having that feeling again. And what that means is that these numbers are even worse than they were in the financial crisis. I mean, if you look at the projected declines in GDP in the second quarter that some financial firms were projecting today for the economy as a whole, they were remarkable. They were numbers in the teens. One was suggesting that we could have an annualized rate of more than 20% decline. I mean, that looks like a depression. And what's particularly disappointing about it is that if we'd had a faster response to the virus from the Trump administration, some of this could have been avoided because the spread of the virus wouldn't have been as bad. As you said, losing a week now costs a month later. And that's both in terms of lives, but it's also in terms of the damage to our economy.
Please let us call on all of you to do this again at your earliest convenience. 2 must-read bylines and 1 must-listen-to physician. Ashley Parker, David Leonhardt, Dr. Thomas Frieden, our thanks for starting us off tonight. Coming up for us on this Friday evening, this virus has shown a special cruelty towards seniors, the most endangered demographic group in our country right now. Tonight, a look at the effort to shield them, and later,
no one should come in contact with anyone over 50 with those pre-existing conditions or over 70 in general without checking first to see if you have a temperature. Use a thermometer. If you have a temperature over 100, you should not be in contact with anyone in those vulnerable categories.
The mayor of New York today, Americans are being asked to take every precaution possible to help suppress the spread of this coronavirus. Remember, though, that will only, at its best, slow the problem and not stop it. In densely populated cities like New York, where there's been an explosion of confirmed cases, there are pleas for more help.
If help doesn't come, we're going to lose people who should not die. Where the hell is the federal government?
With us for more tonight, Dr. Nahid Badalia, an infectious diseases physician and the medical director of the Special Pathogens Unit up at BU School of Medicine in Boston. She worked along with the World Health Organization during the West African Ebola epidemic, also among our medical contributors. Doctor, again, it was a joyless piece of work on my part to say at the top of the broadcast tonight, for some folks, the cavalry's not coming, and this is the time to hunker and take some worst-case scenario predictions seriously. What aren't we doing enough of, and what are we doing wrong in your view?
Yeah, I think one of the main things is we need to make it more obvious to the public why this is important. And I think you've done this and others have done this, really about why it is that we need fewer people to get sick. So you just mentioned about vulnerable populations and those who are elderly. The best way to keep our loved ones who are older or who have medical conditions is to stay healthy ourselves. And by doing that, we avoid another person potentially getting sick and then ending up in the emergency room or in the hospital. One of the things that I think is also getting missed a little bit is the anxiety and and amount of stress that hospitals are currently facing in many metropolitan areas in terms of the resources that they see potentially not mapping out to meet the need as the number of patients increase.
What do we do about the folks who believe they have the superpower of immunity, in some cases because they're young and on spring break and frolicking on a beach in Florida that happens to be still open until the end of this weekend? In other cases, social media is full of people having lunch or dinner with their pals. It's still full of allegations that this is somehow a media created illness. What do we do about that aspect of our society?
I wish that I could take those people who are out there to show them what it looks like in the emergency rooms already across the country right now, how busy those places have become, and how when this increases is going to be a burden there. But the main thing to know is we know now from even data here in the United States that people of every age can get sick. There are vulnerable people in every age group. And so even if you're young, that does not make you immune. There's a chance that you might get this and you may have a tough course of it. We're seeing young people get admitted already in our emergency rooms who are younger than what we would have expected to see. I honestly think that's one of the main things. And the other is just stress. You know, it's not to protect strangers. It's really to protect even our loved ones who are in our life.
And I was going to ask about a significant other, someone you share a house or apartment with. One of you, 50% of you, comes down with flu-like symptoms. What is the first line advice for that scenario?
Yeah, the CDC has actually a wonderful resource on their website. One of the main things is to ensure that you don't need access to medical care immediately. And you do that by contacting your medical provider and ensuring that you should really actually be staying home and not getting medical care immediately. When you are at home, practice the same thing that you do elsewhere, which is keep a distance from the person who's sick. The main goal in that scenario is to decrease the amount of virus that's around because you have someone who's sick in the house. So keeping a distance from them and then cleaning all the common surfaces and common objects, such as remote controls or potentially phones, things you wouldn't think of. But first and foremost is to potentially make sure that people who are sick can provide care for themselves. And if that's the case, you don't have to have as much interaction between the people who are sick and people who are well in the house.
We'll be respectful of your hours and your day job, but we'd love to talk to you again. You've been terrific, Dr. Nahid Badalia. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Coming up for us, some governors say it's time to call in the military on a much bigger scale. Gulf War veteran who served as commander of Joint Task Force Katrina is standing by to talk to us.
When you're looking to hire, you can find just the right person on Indeed. Indeed gives you
Welcome back. More and more state governors are ordering up the deployment of the National Guard. As of this morning, over 3,300 Air and Army National Guard members in over half of our states now. 27 of them are now supporting the response efforts at the direction of those governors. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Russell Honore led the relief effort on the ground in New Orleans in the days following Hurricane Katrina. He is, as you may have guessed by looking at him, a 37-year veteran of the U.S. Army. Wow. His book, by the way, is called Leadership in the New Normal, and he's been kind enough to join us tonight from Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Good for him.
General, first of all, it's great to see you. Thank you for coming in. Secondly, there's nothing easier for civilians and office holders than to talk about calling up the Guard and Ready Reserve. It's made a little more complicated in this case because they all have to leave their homes and families where they might have been quarantining. Talk about the Guard and Ready Reserve and talk about the capability that they have that we have not tapped yet.
Well, our Guard is our home force. They're at the beck and call of the governor. This is what they live for. That's why they're in the state. That's their first mission, to respond to missions as assigned by the governor of particular states. And we've seen some great examples in New York and down here in Louisiana. Within hours, Guard units were mobilized and they were out actually doing test stations, mobile testing stations, and assisting with logistics in both states. And it's happened across the country. As the Guards show up, they don't need to exchange business cards with the local officials because they know them. They're trained all the time for disasters in our states, and they're the ideal first force to call. And then they're backed up by our Army Reserve and our active duty DOD, which has some capacity beyond the medical and logistics capacity that's in the Guard, that's dealing with sustainment and logistics. Brian, one of the big dogs that the president had unleashed on this problem is the DOD Logistics Management System, called the DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, that could be working with the Department of Health in determining what is the total asset visibility of supplies on hand. Now break that down into civilian terms. What do you have in your state? What do you have in each hospital? What you have in each county? Until we know that, we will not be able to work out the numerations for the days of supply that's available in each state. If we don't, the first governor gonna put an order in for 50 million masks, and that might be a 30-day supply, then places like New Orleans or Los Angeles may fall short. I know that's a long answer, but I hope we can follow up on that point, because logistics supply and demand has to be worked out if the government is going to turn the corner on this, where our audio and our video start matching from the White House.
Yeah, to your point, I hope somebody in the West Wing is watching. This is the cavalry. They will come, but they have to be called first. And General, just remind people what their medical capability is. Some of these states are going to need what civilians call field hospitals.
Yeah, we have a limited number of those. The ones we have are focused on trauma. When we call up the reserves or when we mobilize those two ships, we actually pull military doctors that are on military installation, Army bases, Army posts, and Navy and Air Force bases to man those hospitals. We still have to maintain our wartime footing because all those units have wartime missions. So if we pull up the reserve, guess what? We're going to be pulling doctors out of hospitals to reinforce areas inside the country. I think a better idea, Brian, let's start this idea. We're already into May. Graduate all the nurses, senior nurses in every university in the country. Graduate them now. We had to do that in World War II, as well as all allied health. Graduate all the doctors that are ready to graduate in May. Give them their white coats now, and we will exponentially increase the available doctors and nurses.
Yes.
We got to think outside the box.
Yes.
The president talks about wartime footing. We've got to break some more of the rules and get the governors and those hospitals the help they need. And I do believe in the Reserve Corps. There are many tasks that retired doctors can still work on the appendix and free the rest of the surgeons to deal with people that are sick from the virus. We've got to mobilize the country if we're going to get this done, because right now the White House is saying one thing that does not match what's going on in hospitals around the country. And the governors are not going to say anything contrary to what the White House said, because you remember what happened to the mayor of Puerto Rico if you say something out of line with what the White House say. We got to get past this and start speaking the truth. And I thought the mayor of New York today had a pretty clear message, as well as the governor of New York, on what the requirements are. I think the White House got to try to meet those demands and bring in the Department of Defense logistics to help make that happen, Brian.
Right.
And that's why I was so happy to see Russell Honore roll into town when we were in New Orleans after Katrina. General, it's a pleasure to listen to you. I just hope people beyond this conversation are listening. Russell Honore from Baton Rouge, Louisiana tonight. Coming up, the place where people go to get away, to cut loose, cannot get out of the path of this virus. There it is. We'll talk to two folks from there right after this.
do you have proof? Proof? I can fight moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis.
I agree that there was warnings being put out, even from the Windmill Ministries, going all the way back to its original state in January, whenever they first started supposedly keeping up with the numbers of the victims of the catastrophes over in China. That there was other people from Homeland Security that was knocking on the door and that was telling the White House, this is serious, this is serious, this is serious. And to some extent, it was going in one ear and out the other. And now we're all in behind the 8 ball to the point of having to deal with this on a personal, local level, regardless of where you're at, regardless whether you be in Florida, close to the beaches, or you be in Miami, or Daytona, or Tampa, or Orlando, or Jacksonville, or St. Augustine, or some of the other high populated areas down in Florida. And I really, it just makes me shudder and shake. It gives me an eerie feeling of how damaging that this could actually become to our elderly of the senior citizens in your highly populated areas, such as Florida and your coastlining areas all through the lower Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, going all the way down to Brownsville, Texas, going back up to the lower parts of Arizona, all the way into the southern part of California, towards the retirees, the people who have ventured down into the southern range to escape the cold. It just makes me shiver and shake to think how devastating that this could be. Let's say in Phoenix, Arizona. In Phoenix, Arizona, their population, give or take, is right around 1 million during the summer months. But come in the month of November, their population will jump from 1 million to about 1.7 million because of the people that snowbirden down in the Phoenix, Arizona area to escape the cold. Same way down at Tucson. People down there has getaway houses, getaway homes that they use for a winter retreat to escape the cold, and most of those people are elderly. With this being as early as it is right now in the month of March, the vast majority of those people have not yet left the southern district towards going back up into the northern ranges. Some of them may have had, because the winter has been so mild this year, towards going back up in Minnesota, Nebraska, and places like up in Maine, and people going back up into Wisconsin and to places up in Lake Michigan and places like that. Some of them may have already ventured back north to go back home because of it being a mild winter. But ordinarily, with it being just mid-March, now we're leaning towards the latter part of March, but ordinarily they don't head out until about the first or the second week of April is whenever you will see a vast supply of people that will be leaving the southern area going back into the northern area. A lot of those people has drivers. They won't even drive their own rigs because they're so old uh, they feel inconfident in being able to maintain a big RV or a fifth wheel or something like that, and they'll pay somebody $2, $2.50, $3 a mile just to hook onto their RV and carry it back to wherever that they live, up towards Maine or up towards Boston or way up towards the northern part of the New York State or up towards Lake Michigan. They'll pay somebody to drag their unit back home, because some of those units are very, very nice. Some of those units are well over $100,000 rigs. I mean, we're talking about rigs that are nicer than most people's homes, generally speaking. And we're also talking about people that made good money in their careers, doctors, lawyers, whatever, judges. And that is their, that is their lifestyle. They are basically dual citizens. They live in one part of the world or one part of the country. In one part of the summer months, but in the winter months, they'll go down south to escape all that cold because of their arthritis and bursitis and just getting old in general. That type of protocol's been going on now for quite some time.
Proof I can fight. Wait, you what?
Well, there's a new addition to the iconic Welcome to Vegas sign, the friendly reminder about social distancing. And how to put this gently, the reason what happens is in Vegas is supposed to stay in Vegas is often related to the opposite of social distancing. It's a strange sight. Casinos, bars, restaurants, clubs closed for at least 28 more days. The Vegas Strip is pretty much deserted. It's the first time the Strip has gone dark since the Kennedy assassination. Back with us tonight is John Ralston, veteran journalist and editor at the Nevada Independent. And we welcome to the broadcast Jade Powell. She's a pre-med student at the University of Nevada in Reno. She started a volunteer group called Shopping Angels that helps the sick and elderly by doing their shopping for them. John, I'd like to begin with you. I last saw you in the taxi line at a casino on a Saturday night after the Nevada caucus. All was well, all was normal. Talk about the economic impact. How many jobs have been idled?
Tens of thousands. Is going to end up being hundreds of thousands by the time it's over, Brian. It's absolutely crushed this city. It is the eeriest thing you can imagine. You're right. You and I were together. It was teeming with people. Now there's nobody on the Strip. On the Las Vegas Strip, of all places. It's absolutely destroyed that industry, at least temporarily. They're going to be closed for at least 30 days. It may end up being longer. The governor has now come out with a very strong order that essentially everything but essential businesses have to be closed. That you can call it a shutdown, a partial shutdown. It is going to have a devastating effect on this economy, Brian, because the state budget and local government budgets here are essentially built on gaming and sales taxes. There are no gaming and sales taxes right now, and it's going to have a really bad impact on the economy. There's going to have to be a special session of the legislature, and it just depends. You and I don't know how long this is going to last, right? Is it going to be 2 months? Is it going to be 6 months? We just don't know.
There was another time, they didn't mention it, that I was there in Las Vegas. It was in the it was in the fall 2010. After the economy went to crap in a handbasket, and I was actually working at the time for Bill Luke Chrysler Dodge on Camelback Road. And I was one of the first ones to go over the new bridge there at the Hoover Dam. I forgot how many, I think it was about a $750 billion project that they had built that was going to cut off about an hour, hour and a half going over to Las Vegas. But I went on into Las Vegas shortly after the bubble burst had happened in 2008, 2009. And the country was still wheeling over that because the gasoline at that time was give or take around $4 a gallon. And in some places even $5 a gallon. It was the most eerie sight that I think that I had ever seen by going down into Las Vegas and it basically being a ghost town. It wasn't as bad as what it is now, or the pictures that I'm seeing now. There was still a little bit of activity, but they had been hit below the knees pertaining to the gas going up to abnormal prices and basically shutting various places down throughout the countryside. And you know, whenever you're out there on the road and you see how the general population travels on major corridors going from one major city to another out west, and you're riding with Swifty, you're riding with J.B. Hunt, you're riding with some of the big billion-dollar truck driving industries, and you're seeing these truck drivers back off the speed limit from normally 75 to 80. Some of them wasn't going no faster than 55 to 60, and the reason why that they was doing that was for economical purposes, so that their trucks would not be drinking as much fuel. You know, ordinarily an 18-wheeler don't get but give or take around 4 to 5 miles to the gallon. Some of them maybe 6. They drink diesel like sifting through water whenever they're pulling a big load, you know, 60, 70, 80,000 pound load. And whenever you see these truck drivers driving 55 on a 75 mile an hour speed zone, and you not just see one or two, but it's generally that way across the board, you know that something is going on throughout the nation that has caused these people to want to lower their speed limit so that their trucks, instead of getting 4 or 5 miles to the gallon, hopefully maybe it would get 6 or 7 or 8 miles to the gallon. You know that something is abnormal or unusual whenever you fill up your own gas tank that holds basically about 24 gallon, and you're having to pay almost $100 to fill that tank up. That bubble burst that happened in 2008, 2009, leading into 2010 was one of the reasons why that it put a lot of people out on the streets, a lot of good people that ordinarily had good jobs, that had good homes, that had good cars, that had good relationships. It put them out on the streets, and to this day, over 10 years later, this country has still not fully recovered from the bubble burst that happened whenever George Bush, in leaving the office, had to borrow $775 billion to bail out General Motors, all the airplane people, as well as Ford and some of the real estate markets out there. You knew then, whenever that occurred, that things was abnormal. And yes, it was eerie down on the strip, driving down through there and only seeing basically a third of the amount of traffic that you ordinarily would have seen at any other given day. It was an eerie feeling. I only hung around in Vegas for maybe 4 or 5 hours, and then ushered back to Phoenix, Arizona, which is give or take about a 3.5, 4 hour drive because of the new bridge that they had put in. Now, if they didn't put that new bridge in, that would have added another 1.5 hour drive one way. Instead of it being a 3.5 hour drive, it'd have been more like a 4.5 to a 5 hour drive, and I probably wouldn't have done it. But because I didn't have nothing to do, I was down in the Phoenix, Arizona area working to begin with, working for a Chrysler dealership at the time on Camelback Road. I decided that I would mosey up that way and see what I could see. It was eerie. It was very, very eerie. Kind of like what they're talking about right now.
So, Jade, Las Vegas is built around hospitality and by extension, kind of the rest of the state. But for the people who live there, it's just home. Tell the good people watching about the good deeds you're doing out there.
Yeah, of course. So Shopping Angels is a free delivery program that I designed for people who are more high-risk populations. So this includes seniors or those with heart, lung, or immune conditions. So my volunteer group will go to stores, maybe multiple stores, to go get your groceries for you, and then exchange cash at the time of delivery so that those people who are at risk don't have to expose themselves to any strangers or have to go to public.
Seeing those type of services that we're seeing now that does go on out in the Western Hemisphere, places like Colorado, Phoenix, Arizona, Las Vegas, Nevada, Southern California, those are practices or adventures that the vast majority of the people east of the Mississippi River don't know a thing in the world about. There's very few cities that can relate to these type of services, especially whenever it comes to people really sticking their hand out and saying, you know what, these people deserve help. They're our elderly. They have fought for what they have. They worked. They deserve a good retirement. And a lot of those people, they can't do no better for themselves. And God bless people like her that are willing to stick out their arm and to say, we hope that you appreciate our hospitality, because it is a blessing in disguise towards people being able to do stuff like this.
Places that may have a lot of contagions on them.
And Jade, tell me about you. When do you hope to complete your med school degree?
So I'm a pre-med student at the moment, so I will be applying to medical school in a couple years. So that's well off in the future for me.
And for every other parent watching, tell me you're taking precautions in dealing with people and going about your volunteer work.
Yeah, so every volunteer does get an introductory email from their state coordinators that says the general precautions to continue practicing good hand hygiene, because that's one of the best ways, and to practice social distancing even while you're delivering. And then our volunteers are also instructed to wear gloves. Rubber or latex is fine. And we do ask them to wear a mask when available. We know that there is a shortage, so many of our volunteers wear bandanas and scarves to cover their mouths so that you don't breathe on the items and stuff like that. So we try to protect the safety of both clients and volunteers.
John, let's talk about the food and beverage workers. Let's talk about the very same people we talked about as a huge potential voting bloc during the Nevada caucus. The people who clean the rooms, the people who drive the cabs, serve all the beverages, work the tables. What are they all going to do to sustain life?
It's a really good question, Brian. Now, a lot of these casino companies are doing right by their workers. They're paying them even though they're not working now. They're maintaining their health benefits. Different companies are doing it in different ways. Some are being more generous than others, but generally they've really stepped up. But these companies are getting crushed. Brian, you've already heard talk of a potential bailout of the gaming industry. Nobody knows what that would look like. You had the local lobbying arm here, the Nevada Resort Association, come out with a paper today saying that the economic impact could be as big as $40 billion if these casinos have to remain shuttered for a while. But you and I know what the problem is, Brian. You have 3 million people a month plus coming through this city and going into these casinos. You can't open them up again. That's a petri dish for the spread of this disease. So the governor has essentially said that the trade-off between the economic devastation and the potential for this to spread, he talked to medical professionals that they essentially told him, you got to shut these places down or it's going to last much longer. I think he hopes it's only a month or two. But again, Brian, I go back to saying something that people in our business don't say too often. We just don't know, do we? We don't know when the so-called curve is going to flatten out. And those workers you're talking about are really going to be hurt by this.
That is the truth. To John Ralston, to Jade Powell, hang in there. Thank you for joining us. We'll check back in with you both and with your city. Coming up, what happens when a main source of distraction and entertainment disappears in hard times?
Cheers, Golden Corral to go.
"24 hours, zero heartburn."
Welcome back. Remember the NBA? Remember when we filled out NCAA brackets in the office pool? Seems so quaint now. Remember baseball? There's no sports. We knew the one guy to talk to about that, and he's back with us tonight. Mike Pesca, host of the Slate podcast called The Gist. He is also the author of Upon Further Review, the greatest what ifs in sports history, which I'm sure will be revised and updated after this what if that nobody saw coming. Mike, I may not want to hear the answer, but what are sports fans doing with no sports? You got to get these directions down. Yeah. What are sports fans doing with no sports, and what are they betting on? Not that there's ever any wagering in sports.
They're betting on the weather. Literally, some of these online sites are taking bets on the weather. They're betting on politics. Without sports, I have felt it like a phantom limb where I've reached for a remote and then I realized, oh, there's no game there. And at first I felt a little guilty about it because sports are entertainment and they're frivolous. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that sports are actually about community. And I thought about how a Mets game with Liza Minnelli singing brought New York together after 9/11, and the Yankees being in the World Series did the same, and the Red Sox after the bombing of the Boston Marathon, and just absent tragedy, what the Green Bay Packers mean to Wisconsin and how Cheesehead defines that state more than the word Wisconsinite. So sports is togetherness, and this is a time without togetherness. So it's more than just a lack of distraction. It's a lack of community, and that's maybe what hurts the most.
Because you follow it and because you're an all-around smart guy, I need some predictions from you. Will we see baseball played this year? Will we watch the Summer Olympics? Will we see the scheduled start of the NFL season?
Summer Olympics, maybe the Fall Olympics. Baseball, I think, will be played. They're looking for pushing it back to May. But when we say baseball, we should mean Major League Baseball, and this is going to hit the minor leagues extremely hard. They don't have cushions. They operate on thin margins. There was already a plan to eliminate a bunch of minor league teams. I don't see how they can avoid it. And all the sports, and Adam Silver was saying this in an interview on ESPN, they know no more than we do. They are as dependent on the virus as anyone else, and they want to be out there and they want to be leaders and they want to be distractions and they want to make money for themselves. but they can't know more than we do, and they're not going to do anything more dangerous than any other institution in society.
Yeah, I'm a NASCAR fan. I'm worried about small tracks that were already on the edge. This weekend, they're going to race computer versions. I need internal combustion to make me go. Mike Pesca, if it's okay with you, you have a lovely home. We'd like to invite you on as this gets a little longer in the tooth. Thank you very much. We'll be listening to you in the interim. Coming up, just one family amid all the families already touched and already robbed by this virus.
This BLT is delicious. Made it myself.
Then bring home the best.
Last thing before we go tonight, if even a fraction of the most dire coronavirus projections come to pass, then we are going to lose people from our lives. Families across this country are mourning losses of their own already, as are those of us who are members of the NBC News family. Our friend and co-worker and fellow traveler Larry Edgeworth has died after testing positive for the virus. While you may not have known him or his name, his work came into your home on a regular basis.
Wow.
On countless shoots around the world, Larry was our sound guy, our audio man.
Wow.
And we traveled the world together, the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, countless interviews with presidents, Hurricane Katrina, speaking of General Honore, and so many other natural disasters. He loved his work and was superb at it, and we loved him. Cool as a cucumber, old school, gracious and warm and kind and tireless in an exhausting and often dangerous business. Larry Edgeworth was 61. Our condolences to his wife, Crystal, and their 2 boys. The world he leaves behind is still full of sounds. All that's missing is a man who knew how to capture them all so well. That is our broadcast for this Friday night and for this week. On behalf of all of my colleagues here at the networks of NBC News, good night from our temporary field headquarters.
That's sad. And now that's something that we're going to hear a lot more of. That's even the sadder part. I guess this is a golden opportunity for various business owners to be doing some facial work to their buildings during the time that the traffic isn't near as bad, regardless whether they're replacing windows or shutters or putting up a street sign or major work on redecorating their outside. This will be the golden opportunity for a lot of construction projects to be going on with the traffic not being hustle bustle like it usually is in New York City and probably in other places, providing that the people aren't so sick that they can get out there and do the work. I see a crane right there. Looks like he's involved in doing something. Looks like maybe he's working on a canopy or something right there. These are eerie, strange, abnormal, unusual times that we have been merged off into, that we're just all going to have to make adjustments towards accepting this towards our new reality for the next, who knows, month, 2 months, may even last longer than that. This will be a game changer. This will be a game changer. Good luck to my viewers. Good luck to all of us who are seeking a righteous lifestyle through the teachings and through God Almighty, the Lord Jesus Christ. Thanks for listening, and shalom.